Sure. Here's the exact text you provided. Parole. Parole refers to the conditional release of prisoners or offenders in certain cases before the completion of the term of imprisonment to which they have been sentenced. With parole, the prisoners serve the last portion of their sentence in the community after completing a mandatory period of substantive sentence in prison as required under the Good Conduct Prisoners Probational Release Act, Act 1926, and Rules 1927. Conditions of parole. 1. Parole is granted by the provincial government during imprisonment. 2. It is given to offenders involved in minor offenses. 3. Parole is granted to first-time offenders. 4. The prisoner or his or her family can apply for parole. The parole officers and jail superintendent can also recommend the prisoner for parole. 5. During the parole period, the parolee remains under the supervision of the parole officer appointed. 6. The parole is granted for a specified time. 7. It is also area-bound, which means that the parolee is supposed to live in the specified areas or city. 8. Parole officers also assist the parolee to find a job and secure a source of livelihood. 9. The case is not discharged during the parole period. Rather, it is put to freeze. 10. If the parolee commits an offense during the parole period, he or she will be brought back and the previous sentence will be completed, and the new crime would also be prosecuted. Who gives parole? Under these rules, the executive, Home Secretary of the province, is empowered to release certain offenders on parole. When the provincial government is satisfied that a prisoner's track record or good conduct behind bars suggests that he or she would likely abstain from crime and lead a useful and industrious life in the community, it may grant a license of release on the condition that the prisoner remains under the supervision of a parole officer or a secular institution or of a person or society professing the same religion as the prisoner. Supervision of parole officers. The parolees, under the supervision of a parole officer, are employed on fixed wages and under specific terms and conditions with the approved employers of the respective provincial armectorates. Any person or institution can apply to be a potential employer to the R&P director, who, after proper scrutiny and on the recommendations of the relevant district administration where the potential employer belongs to, decides whether to approve the employer or reject the application if it does not fulfill the selection criteria. The required standards for the employer include being a resident of the same province, being of good repute, not involved in any illegal trade/activities, and being able to provide accommodation, clothes, food, and wages to the parolee. Selection for parole. Prisoners may be selected for parole on an application by themselves or their family members, or on the recommendation of the superintendent of the jail. The assistant director and parole officers are also authorized to visit the jails to select suitable prisoners for release on parole. Evidence shows that these visits are not frequently carried out due to a low number of parole officers and weak coordination between prison management and the parole officers. In most of the districts, the probation officers have been assigned additional duties of a parole officer to cover the issue of understaffing. Functions of a parole officer. After the release of prisoners on parole, the functions of the parole officer include supervision and rehabilitation of offenders, periodic visits to parolees, collecting wages, and submitting reports to his/her supervising officer. For example, to the Assistant Director R&P about a parolee's work performance, and to process any complaints. Scope of parole system. The parole system is primarily based on the Good Conduct Prisoners Probational Release Act 1926 and its rules 1927 and executive orders for implementation. Some of the provisions' executive orders limit its scope and need addressing. For example, parolees must be employed a minimum of 45 miles away from their immediate families and can meet their families by taking casual leave with the approval of the relevant parole officer. The parolee becomes eligible for casual leave after the completion of the first 6 months of the parole period. This is a clear violation of the right to family life and contradicts the basic philosophy of community reintegration of the prisoner released on parole.